Okay, it is 10 a.m., so let's start. This is the Netconf working group session. It is a 2.5-hour session. I hope we can avoid to bore you and can entertain sufficient so that you can enjoy instead of sleeping. The first agenda point was asked to change. Suhair's wanted to be first, but I don't see her. So we will continue with the agenda as uploaded. Let's see whether we can put Sue somewhere in the middle. Mahesh, please go ahead.
All right. The usual, I know I'm going to ask for a few volunteers. I have one for Jabber Scribe. Mikhail has graciously agreed to be the Jabber Scribe. We have an Etherpad, which is open, and it has the agenda posted on it. You can get to it from the meetings page. I need one primary and at least one backup note taker. Any volunteers?
So if nobody volunteers, we have to volunteer you. Balaj, would it be okay? Huh?
I have already done one session.
You are trained now. You can do the second. Alex, what about you? Lada. Second one. Sorry for asking names I know well. Jürgen. Yeah, you are the backup for Lada. If Lada speaks, you can note.
Okay, Eric.
I'll take notes after.
Yeah, anybody can write into Etherpad. Please do so. Help us to get the notes complete.
All right. Yes, you can have multiple contributions to the Etherpad. That's the beauty of it. So collaborate. Here's the note well. If you're not familiar with it, please make sure that you do read it. Basically, anything you say or speak in this meeting will be considered part of IETF contribution. So as Mehmet said, we have a fairly full agenda, and we hope to get through quite a bit of it with few speakers, so you won't see too many people going back and forth on these. We have almost 11 items on the charted side of the agenda, and then we have 2 on the non-charted. I see that Sue is just walking in, so we probably will make the change then as we had planned.
Thank you.
So here is a brief status on some of the changes since Buenos Aires. Yang Library is now an RFC 7895, and we're starting to see some implementations. Would highly encourage people to give us feedback. RESTCon version 15 is in last call. I guess it ends in August. Yang patch, I believe, is in AD evaluation queue. We had an interim meeting in May to go over the server model and the Yang push drafts. In that meeting, it was decided to split the server model draft actually into 5, if I keep getting that number wrong. So there's an, and Kent will talk about the models that he has. Yeah, the correct list is on the agenda. Yang push, as we had already discussed, is going to be 4 drafts, and Eric will talk about them. Oh, okay. And then we have finally zero touch in the chartered list that Ken pulled. It has 7 open issues, 3 in verified state. I don't know if there's a change. You'll address that.
So where's Sue again?
I think I just, or did she step out? So,
She was here for a second.
are we missing her? Anything you want to add before we?
Yeah, no, actually, we should go ahead with ResConf. Sue can have her slot after that.
You get to talk.
Okay, it's hard to see the
Just-
slides. Okay, I'm gonna just give an overview of where we are with ResConf and Yang Patch. They're already pretty much baked in. We'll be going through several review cycles. Thanks to Benoit for 2 extensive reviews of ResConf. And then also we had the media types reviewed by the media types list and also on Netconf. So there's still some editorial comments to incorporate. They're on GitHub. You want to see the details, but there was 80 review of Yang Patch and a few other review comments. And also there was a Opster review that has some edits that will be done. So there needs to be a -16 with clarifying edits. I didn't really see anything that would be a significant change. There's like inconsistent use of terminology, that sort of thing needs to be fixed. So I don't see any reason. I don't know how to really deal with that. We wait till after this 1 month last call and then make those editorial changes, or?
Up to you. I mean, as early as you can.
Well, if a draft isn't reviewed, then if you put out a new one, don't have to stop.
There is
reviewing
one point I'm interested in. Do you have anything from the review from Lionel with which you disagree? We have to discuss here.
I haven't looked at it that close, but at this point, I don't agree.
So if there is an issue or you are concerned with a comment, we need to discuss it immediately on the mail list.
Okay, no, I looked through it and I just saw stuff that was
So please look.
legitimate concerns about use of terms.
So please
and
look
stuff
at
like
it
that.
already today and bring it to the mail list if there's an issue. If not, then as soon as you can, not before.
There's just some sloppy terminology on my part, like data element instead of data node, and
Yeah, there are some things where you probably
Media,
know it
you know,
better and can decide by yourself.
message body instead of message dash body. There's inconsistencies but that have no impact whatsoever on someone deciding, technical issues.
Benoit Claes. So at this point, I'm trying to evaluate on which date I could put this on the ISG telechat. So the last call ends on August 3rd, right? So do you have an estimation on when the next version will be?
Well, that's what I'm asking is I could do a new version, next week, but then we started a new last call.
No.
It is already in IETF last call.
It is, yeah.
All right, so I'm that's
The
it's a bit
earlier,
confusing to me, so that I can update the current version. So if people have comments that are already addressed, then we just say, oh, they're already
yeah, please,
addressed. in that 16.
the earlier the better.
Okay. Thank you. All right, yeah, it was, didn't have any time at the end of last week. Okay, so the media type review, thanks to Sean Turner, has found a few issues, and we got rid of most of the media types that were just basically tying a schema to a particular resource type. So if we're just dealing, so the only resource types there really are Yang data and Yang patch. We need Yang patch so we could tell the difference between our two kinds of patches. There was also issues related to the XML encoding. I think that's on the next slide. So yeah, the XML encoding, we removed +ML because it has requirements for fragment identifiers that we're not willing to do. It actually makes no sense at all on Yang patch, since its only method allowed is patch, and the fragment identifier was meaningless in that context as far as I'm concerned. And so we have a mechanism for filtering content out of the internal implementation, and X pointer is XML specific, and we need to support JSON as well. So we're not willing to do the XML. So we were asked to remove the +XML. I did that. Now Sean Turner is saying, well, make it -XML, so at least people don't know that you're talking about the XML version. If we're not willing to use the X pointer. So that's change will be made in -16 as well. I'll change Yang patch to Yang patch -XML. The GitHub issues are very, I guess, minor at this point. I put an issue up there. Should the media type be in its own draft? Because we did that with the patch. We put it in its own draft, and so I wanted to make sure that the working group understands there will be a normative reference to RESTconf to use this media type. Is that a problem? No one had any comments at all, so I assume it's not a problem.
So if there is still no comment, we will do it as proposed. So if you have an issue or comment, please speak up now.
I think it was brought up in the media type review. It's generally a first order topic, not something
Just
very
to be sure
difficult.
it is closed. So.
Okay. And so then there's also a review of Yang patch that I didn't update the GitHub status to indicate that those changes have already been incorporated. So there's really no open issues left on GitHub at this point, except the edits from those reviews I said earlier. So I think we have the IETF last call started, and the next step is to finish this up and publish it. So,
any timeline for the Yang patch updates?
Yeah, I'll try to do them next week.
Okay.
Do both drafts at once. Okay, I think that's it. Any other questions?
Any comments on RESTconf or Yang patch? So we are happy we are that far with RESTconf. It is just before publication. I assume the industry is waiting on it. So I think the next is Sue, right? It's like a magician trick. She's disappearing, coming back and away and back again. So stay here.
Stay here. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I went to get a glass of water, so it didn't. Oh, just went. There it is. Thank you. I did.
So we have 20 minutes plus 5.
20 minutes?
Plus 5.
Plus 5. Okay. Okay. There's the slides. Good. Okay. This is a review of the IR2S requirements that we're sending to Netconf. We're asking for your feedback. We will go slide by slide, and I will try to go through and answer questions. Okay. These got a hum in the IR2S meeting on Monday. If you were in the IR2S meeting on Monday, we are doing the same walkthrough. But it is critical that we work together with the Netconf people, the working group, to make sure we provide good requirements. And based on the feedback from Kent Watson on Monday, I have altered these in order to, did we get the altered set up? I'm going to just see.
13.
Yes, it is. It is the right one. I should have one slide. Yes, we have the altered slides. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the requirements, and then I'm going to go back through some models on what it might mean, because that may help you look at the requirements. It is nothing more than trying to get the requirements set up between the two groups. Okay, let me start on the first requirement, which is R2S requires state that does not persist across a reboot. And if the state must be supported, it must be done by replay from the R2S clients. We're not going to pick it up from a running config. We're not going to do anything like that in R2S. We're going to put the onus on the clients. So while first seeing this may be seen equivalent to writing running store, it can, the run config can be copied to a persistent data store. The R2S ephemeral state must not. By the way, let me try to get a sense. How many people have seen these requirements before? Okay. What is the best way that I can make use of your time? Walk through them one by one and just simply say, have you had questions? Or basically stand up here and ask, there are 15 requirements. What can I do to answer additional questions? So how many people want me just to ask, are there additional questions? Okay, how many people want me to walk through them one by one? Okay, so I'm going to stand here and say I have 15 requirements, one with persistence, which we just went through, 6 with constraints, 1 with the Yang feature, which we presented to NetMod, 2 with the protocol, which I will actually show and pause on for a moment, 4 with multi-headed control, and 1 with multiple transactions. Now, I will ask, is there anyone who would like to make general comments at this time? Okay, I will go to the Netconf specific work and read that one. And there is one slide for this. In the Netconf requirement 9, requirement 9 is for Netconf, requirement 10 is for RESTconf. And by the way, the R2S working group and this chair, we don't recommend holding things for this type of environment. I strongly encourage that RESTconf should go forward because there is some work to be done either in NetMod or Netconf on setting up ephemeral data store. So holding back any type of deployment is a bad idea. There are 2 simple requirements. Support for communication mechanisms to enable the R2S client to determine that the R2S agent supports the mechanism needed for R2S operation. In other words, we've got to be able for the client to talk to a Netconf server and find out that it can do all the R2S functions. Now, for those of us inside of R2S, we'd like it to be easy. It must, however, be possible. The second is the ephemeral state must support the notification of write conflicts using the priority requirements defined in section 7 below, which is the multi-headed section, which I will briefly show and ask if you have questions. If you have no questions or considerations, please realize this will probably come back to you within weeks. I think we've come to a consensus within the working group that we had one of the requirements, requirement 7, which I will show you, which we had some question in the meeting, but the working group list and the rest seems to have a consensus. At least that's what the chair that's not an author believes. So multi-headed control in 11.12 and 13 and 14 seems to be, this chair and other authors, wordy, but in the working group, people wanted to have additional details. So it must be able to support client identity that can link to a priority. And multi-headed control must be able to be solved by client priority. If client 1 has priority 1 and that's the best, and client 2 has priority 3 and that's worst, client 1's data wins in the right. Okay. Priority may be changed by AAA because that's part of the node's information. Okay. 12 is to say, initially, we believe that the operator should not make this a normal case. The operator should have no double writes. Okay, but stuff happens in a network. I'll say stuff instead of what some people say. Okay, so you have to have a deterministic result. That's 12. 13 is if you have requirements, it must, IR2S must not mandate how IEEE supports priority. Okay, so IEEE must be able to update things, radius, diameter, what your private stuff, but IR2S just gets to look at the results. And 14, we are trying to give it deterministic results. Now, in interest of your time and the flow of the working group, those are the 14 cases. Some people tag to that. Number 15, which is the multiple transactions, but it just says if you do multiple transactions at the same time, it can't corrupt the database. Now, any questions on the things which are basic to Netconf and not the data store specifically? Okay. That's fine. I am here to provide you with, now, Kent and other, we tried to refine question 7. I believe there was a reference from Joe Clark and from others. This is an alternative we will be trying to resolve at 11:30, that ephemeral, instead of this version, ephemeral state could override overlapping configuration or vice versa. We've gone to just saying ephemeral configuration must have a priority that works against local config's priority, and whoever has the best priority wins. And this may be provided via the IETF protocol mechanisms. We do not want to define a solution for Netconf. Questions? Yes.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I have a slight concern with this wording that it sort of implies that there's going to be changes to the running configuration data or whatever that data was called to now add priorities in, whereas the previous solution I don't think required
You
that.
really have priority with administrative distance.
But not in terms of what's being annotated in the Yang nodes in the data store, as far as I know.
Yes, but when you have R2S, you have a RIB addition. No matter what you do, you have a RIB addition. This is telling you what happens when you have the RIB addition. You have to be able to say, what's in there, this RIB addition, you've got to be able to resolve who wins.
Okay, so I understand the wording previously that you said that you could put priorities into the I2S configuration data store, and you could then collapse that down, and ultimately you compare that to the running configuration and choose who wins with the binary flag. Here, this is the new wording's different than that. Effectively, you're adding extra work into that running configuration data store, or you're not. By setting a priority on the local configuration, it feels to me that that's then changing that existing running configuration data store. Or am I misreading that?
No, we're still we're still saying, here's the local config, which represents to us whatever the running and everything else comes. We're not defining how you define running config or operational state. Whatever the result of configuration is, and whatever the result of ephemeral database is, they both have a priority, and you compare that. So if you think one wording's better, please make a comment on the list for a suggestion. We're just trying,
Yeah, I will. I haven't had a chance to yet. Okay.
please do. The list is open now. We will be discussing this one point because if you're concerned about the way it sounds, that's the goal.
Okay.
Okay? And please, we're in the middle of final wordsmithing. If you like the first one, say thumbs up for that. If you, I'm trying to make sure we have clarity, and so is Russ White, who's monitoring this. So that'll happen at 11:30 for about 5 minutes, and we should close it off there. And on the list, this is the thing we have to close off on before declaring we're done.
Okay.
Okay.
How did it actually happen that Netconf and I2RS sessions overlap? I mean, this should be possible to avoid.
Yes,
Anyway,
well, I had a long discussion with.
I would like to ask a question, just jumping into the middle, sorry. Is it correct, my understanding, that the requirements you are presenting here are documented in ephemeral state draft?
Yes, they're all
Okay.
documented.
So ephemeral state draft is a working group item?
Yes, and it's been in working group last call,
Okay.
and we got a hum at this group, and we had essentially an approval of the working group last call.
So the crucial thing I see is if any Netconf working group attendee or member has any kind of issue with any of these requirements in the ephemeral state document, people need to speak up now, or as early as possible on the mail list where I2RS document is discussed, I2RS mail list, and I mean, we need to bring it to an end. It has to be finalized as soon as possible.
That's right, and if it's not today, tomorrow, you will get the next version, and I think the will of Russ, when we talked about it yesterday, is he's just entertaining discussions on number 7 within the working group, because everything else seems to have a hum or an agreement and consensus. So if you really have problems with anything in this list, now is the time to talk about it, okay? And I apologize, I had a long discussion with my AD, but I lost on double scheduling. So,
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay.
So at the end, I have another question, but go ahead.
no, I have only one other section to show you. I'm going to go up. I've gone through the requirements, because if most of you have seen this, there's only one other thing I want to highlight, and I want to, because it may help you think through the requirements. But please, if you have something on the requirements, that's why I'm here. So go ahead, Mehmet.
Okay, the other question is, as far as RESTconf is not addressing any of these requirements, there is a protocol strawman document, again, I2RS, in the I2RS working group, but not a working group item yet.
That is correct.
So those requirements which are not addressed by RESTconf or any other draft we know, like PubSub or I mean, also upstate discussion will address one or the other requirement.
Right.
Do we have any table somewhere which shows which requirement is going to be addressed by which draft and which is still open, and we don't have a draft for that?
We specifically did not constrain to solutions. We had a fairly lengthy discussion on the R2S list, encouraging us from various Netconf and Netmod members to not constrain you with solutions.
Yeah, but for the requirements which are not being addressed today, as far as I understand, protocol strawman document is the home for the collection of possible solutions.
That is a place where I'm keeping track of it. In addition, it's a personal document that I will bring forth to the working group again when I've finished an open source implementation. Some of the comments that I received from the Netmod and Yang doctors is some of these requirements or ideas were not implementable. So I have gone and started an open source implementation of all the I2S specific topologies. And based on that recommendation, left it as an individual draft with notes and not taken it forward. Once there is an open source implementation for all three I2S products, then I will bring it forth again to the working group. As it is, it's my notes on what I've learned as a chair and as an implementer. We should have a filter-based RIB, a regular RIB, and topology, right? Alex, where's Alex and Eric? It's already done in ODL, right? Yeah, we're hoping to send that one through because it's pretty well in the code and been looked at and used. So two implementations or one?
There's one that's public.
One that's public and one that's private. That's fine. I mean, that's the sense of two implementations.
What I'm trying to achieve is that we have an overview, a table or something where we can see which requirement is addressed in which draft or could be addressed in which draft. Or if something is remaining open, we don't know yet, then we should become active.
I will be glad to take that as input from Netconf and create an I2S document. I specifically backed off from it because of the feedback from members of Netconf and NetMod who said that that was constraining NetMod and Netconf. That was their opinion on the I2S list. So I stopped the effort in that, but if you will send a request as chair and as the Netconf folks will do that.
Let us define in the minutes of this session an action item to have an overview, such an overview which gives us the information on not addressed or requirements which don't have any home right now.
Okay, we will be glad to do that, but we will move forward with the requirements without that because.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, they seem to be agreed, so.
Yep. Just any other questions? Because this is the important part. You and the working group and Mahesh's questions are what I'm here for. Okay. One last piece just to help your thinking cap.
Kent has a question.
Okay. One last piece. You wanted to get to the talk part.
Kent Watson, a question about the priority and the identity. You said just store the identity, not the priority. My question is it necessary for the agent to be able to discover the priority?
Yes, the whole thing is you didn't have to store both. It's a very simple C structure. What you want to store, right, is you could store an index that says this is an identifier number for a client, and then that would go and you would be able to pull out that client's identity, a priority, and opaque value.
But what I mean to say is if you do a get config on the ephemeral data store, would you be able to see the priority, or I'm sorry, the identity of each node? Would it be tagged with like metadata or something like that, or is it just internal to the device?
It is at this point in the implementation, the requirements do not constrain that either way. The implementation I have done, and the ODL implementation may be different for topology, actually allows you to query that data in the database. The difficulty is you might, for security purposes, not want to let that out. So you may want to have that constrained by a NACA, okay? But in the implementation I have done, I actually made something closer to a transaction ID that's composite of that client information plus the session plus the transaction-based thing, the action or the sub-action that would be happening. Because that's what you need to do, right? The bottom line is you have to tag it someplace for the data. And if you change the data by perhaps changing a next hop or a prefix, you have to tag the change data. That's just, but for routing folks, that's a normal piece of our lifestyle in RIBs. And so I'm referring to RIBs. Did you have any comments regarding how you dealt with that in topology? No, okay. And by the way, we hope to make open source code available for folks as soon as possible. We will give details. There's actually 2 implementations coming from 2 different ways. A PhD student, Edwin Cordelio, if I pronounced, Edwin, if you're here and I pronounced, yep. Did I kill it again? That's okay. Anyway, thanks to Edwin, he started from the bottom up and I started from the top down, which has provided us great insight. In other words, he started with just configuring what you do from Quagga, and I started with the confd daemon from TLF and started copying stuff out of that, and we learned a lot. So hopefully the code plus some notes will be useful to you. Okay, because of that, and because of Russ has actually implemented things like this, one thing you have to realize is we have different validation pieces than have been drawn in other models in our actual code base. Meaning, you know, like everybody else, and this goes closest to Jürgen's model, you remove the interaction if you put ephemeral configuration in, and then you have to validate it in the next step. And then you have to manage the resources. If you don't have, was that me? I'm out of time? Okay, I'll sit down. Manage the resources, and if you have to discover links, you go there, and then you have to inject state where you might inject ephemeral state from the topology, from the OSPF piece, and that gets insulted later. So just some thoughts, and I'm not constraining your design, but this is what's actually happening in the code. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Which one's the go button? This one? All right. All right, you can put the timer on for all 4 because there's one presentation, and you can beep us at the end of all 4. But
You have as a sum 40 or 45
Yeah.
minutes.
And you know, it'll be flopping between Alex and I once or twice during the presentation. At the last Netconf meeting, a number of us presented on the subscription models, and we got a bit of feedback from the team. The team said, get more people involved. We've had 11 weekly meetings with quite a few people who are in this room who can see on the list here. We had a request to break the drafts up into 4 different areas. We've gone ahead and done that. We also had a request to ensure that we had the buy-in of the authors of 5277. And as you can see, there are authors on some of these drafts now. So I think the asks that were made at the last IETF are hit. What we're going to be doing today is talking about where we've gotten with the 4 subscription drafts, give you an overview, and then talk about some details that we've been doing during our weekly meetings.
So one of the commenters, one of the ask was multi-vendor representation.
Yep, and we have quite a few other vendors who are maintaining or in the weekly calls. I would love for some of the people who are the contributors listed on the right with all the other vendors to put the text in to earn authorship, but they have to actually put the text in and then they become authors. It's pretty much that simple. So a couple people have said they're going to put text in, and then they become authors. So you're just waiting for them to do it.
Be aware there is a limitation with the count of authors.
Of course, there is a limitation for the count of authors. However, we have 2 things going for us. We have 4 drafts. I'm happy to jump off some drafts in order to get people in. Second issue is, we do have discrete areas where people can make their contributions. So there's no requirement that everybody on all drafts. There's a procedural issue on the 5277 biz draft, and that is, how do you handle a time where biz authors are on the draft, but you have a lot of new authors? And I think that is an open question more for the leadership of the IETF of what happens when you have an intersection of authors, and we can probably address that offline as a meta issue rather than a draft specific issue.
Yeah, if the limit of the count of authors is reached, I mean, you can decide within the team which of them can be noted as contributor. I personally don't see a big difference between author and contributor. Contributor can contribute anything and as much as he can. So this is the decision within the team.
If you don't see a big difference between contributor and authors, look at all the contributors we have from all the different vendors.
Yeah, the original authors of the RFC, I insisted to include them because this is indeed very important.
No, agreed.
That they are involved in the discussion, I mean, have the responsibility to review and contribute as good as they can.
Absolutely. And, you know, you can talk to the people who are contributors on the right. I don't know of anybody who's feeling excluded in their ideas. Hopefully they're feeling that the conversations are fairly open and we're willing to add and change as they see fit. I've seen no issues so far. If anybody has them, tell me, tell the chairs, and they'll bring it to me. You know, we're willing to take any good ideas.
Yeah, if we don't see any concern or complaints, we'll continue like that.
Yeah, that's fine. Now, just one or two context slides before we get into the details in the draft. What is Event Yang subscriptions? Because again, when we came last time, we talked about Yang data store subscriptions based on 5277. We added in, you know, event subscriptions, and events are not exactly the same as data stores. Event subscriptions existed with Netconf before we ever had Yang data stores. And therefore, the idea of extending from the subscription to data stores to the subscription to events was a natural thing to do. Now, the subscription to the data stores can be any kind of model, open config, awesome, IETF, vendor models, whatever. So the idea of the difference in the support of the different models is certainly part of this. Jürgen, you got a comment? All right. Now, again, we don't have really a chance to go through all the baselines that are here, all the backup. We are going to have a session dedicated to what's happened over the last 4 IETFs to give those of you who want to attend and find out what the full technology is about, a meeting tomorrow from 10 to 11:30 in the Tegel conference room. So we are going to go, you know, soup through nuts through what's in all the drafts and the basic premises behind it. What we're going to do in this meeting is focus on what's needed to get the 3 drafts which have not been adopted yet to adoption, hopefully, if it's up to the working group. And so we're going to focus on the deltas from the previous meetings. Now, as I mentioned, there's 4 drafts. The first one is Yang Data Store Push, and that's already been adopted. It's been adopted for a few sessions now. We have other drafts which have been either broken out or appended from 5277. That includes the subscription for event notifications, which is 5277 biz, and 2 transport drafts, how to transport subscriptions over Netconf, how to transport subscriptions over RESTconf. We have a GitHub repository for the 11 meetings that we've had. All our recordings, all our meeting minutes, all our PowerPoints are referenced off of that GitHub repository. Now, we have a layered framework for the drafts. This is just a context to be able to make sense of what is being in there. Basically, you have some peer or some application making a request for a subscription down into a device, and down to the device, you have a number of functions for subscription management, everything from maintenance of the subscription to stream discovery to OAM. So there's management functions, no big surprise. And those are pretty much split between the 5277 and the Yang push draft. There is event notification generation or the push updates from the stream. And you're going to be having things like filtering and access control and different triggering in there. Those are split between the 2 subscription drafts. And then we have update packaging and flow control. How do you encode over XML, JSON? And then how do you transport over Netconf or RESTconf with various headers? You can see on there Google Protocol Buff and gRPC. There was a routing working group talking about, you know, the ability to have open config models, supportable and pushable. We certainly want to do that and want to support that. How to get it into IETF drafts and allow that is still something we have to work through, but it's certainly a desire for us to allow that kind of transport for the push updates as well. So this is just a context of where the different functions fit in the overall mix. One thing I will note is the event stream generation on the bottom. After the Netconf meeting, there's a discussion on data stores. And what I have on the bottom is just a list of some of the data stores which could end up driving push updates. What are they going to be? What are the actual push updates? We haven't determined it yet. But as Jürgen and Rob and others figure out what the data stores are, we're going to go ahead and find out which one of those we can actually make subscribable, and that will define the streams. In addition, there's other kinds of streams that are out there, the Netconf, existing Netconf 5277 stream, as well as some of the streams that are identified in there for SNMP objects or other items. So one of our big items right now is to figure out how we feed information into subscriptions, because effectively streams acts as a pre-filter, which get rid of a lot of the, the stuff that you wouldn't want to have to filter out from a subscription. Now, we have done, and those of you who attended the Netconf interim have seen this version of the slide. We've done a partitioning of what functions fit into which drafts. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff in the base subscription draft, which is 5277 biz, including error responses, stream types, replay, discovery, just the basics that you need to get a subscription going. We've pulled a lot of stuff that was in the original Yang data store, Yang push draft into the 5277 biz. So a lot of the stuff got moved down. What remained in the Yang data store push is, some Yang specific filters, certain types of triggers and updates that are specific to data stores, and pretty much the prioritization. This is going to match into some of the other prioritization discussions. We have two other drafts for transport, Netconf transport for event notifications, which again got pulled out as a specific Netconf transport, and the RESTconf and HTTP transport, which had, again, a lot of stuff pulled out, and now it's just about transport for those drafts. Basically, the rest of the presentation is going to go through what is new and what's changed and ask for adoption for those areas that we haven't talked about yet. Now, there's a question on context with Open Config Telemetry. Open Config Telemetry is awesome. It's a method for getting subscriptions established for telemetry servers. And there's work going on in that space for telemetry servers. There are a number of functions which are common between the protocols or the efforts. There's a number of things which are not covered at this point in Open Config, which we think is fairly important for a number of the use cases that we've been talking about internally. Things like dampened eventing seems to be pretty important. Security for each individual subtree seems important. And therefore, we have a whole bunch of requirements that we think are effectively key to supporting the full set of use cases that we're finding out there. And as these things evolve, we'll see how it goes. But there is certainly a whole bunch of functionality which we see that makes the Yang subscriptions, the event subscriptions, a superset of what you see in OC telemetry.yang. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Alex. Thank you.
Okay, so the first draft that we broke out, this is basically a new draft that has happened since the last IETF, is the RFC 5277 biz draft. This basically broke out a lot of the stuff that was previously in the Yang push, and essentially some of the highlights that are specified in there is, first of all, support for both dynamic subscriptions via RPC as well as configured subscriptions. Dynamic subscriptions are those where the subscription lifetime is tied to the subscriber session, and this is also where you can support basically negotiation of subscription parameters between the publisher and the subscriber. Then configured subscription are basically an optional feature. Those are subscriptions which are established via configurations. We allow for multiple configurations there. The one thing that's important to note, while both modes are basically supported, there's no mix and match between them, which basically means that if you have a configured subscription, you cannot, for instance, terminate it via RPC and vice versa. So it's either dynamic or configured, but not both. Then basically for the subscription model itself, actually relatively straightforward and unsurprising. I would say basically subscriptions are directed at an event stream. So the event stream is an important concept because that is basically the basic source of the events. There are a set of data streams defined. Actually, the standard event stream is a Netconf stream. This is the stream of all the events that has been defined in RFC 5277. One of the ongoing discussion is basically whether there are additional streams that should be that should be subjected to be included in the standard. Subscriptions then basically specify filters on this filters on the stream, various transport options, and so forth. So the following slides just provide a brief overview of the model. So basically, at the basis, what you see here is basically there's basically a list of streams that are available for subscription. So basically, if there's more than a Netconf stream, those can be basically discovered, retrieved through that. There are a set of filters that can be configured, which can then basically be attached to subscriptions with the RFC 5277 filter type there. And then, well, the other part of the model, second part, basically concerns the configuration of subscriptions. And what you see here, basically, subscription have a subscription identifier. They subscribe to a stream. They have a filter associated with them. They have start time, stop time. You can specify encoding, receivers, transport options, encoding options, and so forth. Third part of the model basically concerns the subscription state. So this is basically the superset of the subscription that you have on the system. This includes the dynamic, well, the subscription that came into being through configuration, or the dynamic subscriptions, and again the same parameters essentially that you have here. Basically, the information on, what are the filters, what are the encodings, who are the receivers, and so forth. Okay, a couple of other model aspects. Obviously, a considerable part of the model is taken by the RPCs for the dynamic subscriptions. So we have basically RPCs to establish a subscription, to modify a subscription, and to delete a subscription, as well as also a set of notifications, which are notifications, basically OEM type of notifications, signal notifications that are used to signal, that are used by the server to signal the receiver about certain events that concern the subscription itself. And so examples are from basic lifecycle events. A subscription has started, a subscription has ended, a subscription has been modified. In the case of configured subscription, also receivers will get notified basically whether they have been added or removed from a subscription. And then in addition, there are also a set of events that allow the server to communicate whether a subscription has been temporarily suspended. That might be, for instance, if the server has temporarily lack of resources or what have you, various conditions that are described also in the document. Yeah. So second item concerns, well, in order to basically communicate those messages, we felt actually that the important thing is that those notifications, they are defined as Yang notification, but they are of course different from regular type of notification in that they are only of interest for a particular subscription itself. And basically you should, as owner basically of a subscription, basically get those notifications, but not anybody else. And in order to distinguish this from regular notification, we are introducing a Yang extension that basically tags those notifications essentially as control plane notifications. And so this basically means that the notifications that are tagged that way are not part of the regular Netconf stream, but essentially of an OEM event stream. One of the discussions, one of the issues that are currently basically being worked and that we are just discussing in the group concerns whether we should actually generalize that, whether, for instance, it would make sense to have a more general tag to indicate an event stream as an option for notification definitions, if it should go someplace else than just the regular Netconf stream. Then related to this is the issue, so which event streams can and which event streams must the server provide? And they're basically where we are at this point is basically clearly there's one event stream that is mandatory. This is the Netconf stream that comes or basically is is carried forward from RFC 5277. This basically means that basically any event that's raised for the Yang notification as per the Yang definitions. That per se actually is sufficient to receive or to subscribe to any type of events. However, one of the questions is that having a single stream can be unwieldy in certain scenarios, because you may have to, for instance, for certain use cases, also for instance in Yang push, you might actually require fairly extensive subscription filters to, for instance, subscribe only to state information and so forth. So therefore, basically, there's a case to be made to include other streams. Basically, candidate streams are one, basically, clearly the stream for the OEM messages for the earlier point, as well as also separate streams to be defined for Yang push. And generally, okay, there's the option also to provide additional streams. This is basically up to the vendor, up to the server implementation. And the question is basically which other streams may make sense to provide and basically include as part of the drafts here. And actually in the Yang push next draft, basically we are defining actually some streams that do make sense, or that we think make sense. Okay, so yeah, so basically the next steps now concerning this draft is a couple of next steps. One thing is actually there's a clearly editorial scrub is still required regarding the separation also between this mainly and the aspects that go into the transport mapping. But basically the larger issue, basically, or the main thing here is basically that we would like to adopt it or ask for adoption as a working group draft. And Eric wants to say something.
Stay there. I guess a procedural question, do you want to do a hum by draft, or do you want to wait to the end? I'd prefer one by draft. I think it makes sense. Oh, you want to do it as a package?
Well, for the 3 drafts that are new, are not work group documents. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And so then in addition, of course, there's also the set of issues that we're working through, basically on the weekly discussions that Eric was also mentioning. I don't know if we need to go through them one by one here. I think some of them are actually not too contentious. They are also documented in the back part of the draft. So I think probably in interest of time, I would actually skip those unless you prefer we go through these one by one.
Mehmet Ersu, Nokia, I have a question because of EN4. How far is an integration with gRPC, for example, necessary?
As part of the draft, the integration is not necessary. However, what we do want to make sure is that basically we do allow for that option. That basically if there is that there are other transport options beyond the Netconf, RESTconf, HTTP2 that are being defined or that are being standardized here that could be provided.
And I'm just going to add to that, in a routing working group, they talked about having the potential for an informational RFC that would just say, here's gRPC. I think that allowing some kind of informational that says, here's a transport binding that would let you do it would also be an option here. And I see absolutely no reason. We're actually intentionally structuring to let the transports be independent of the subscription model. So if anybody wanted to say, here is how to do it with gRPC, we've actually structured the documents to allow that integration to be fairly clean.
Hi, Waleed Al-Bokl from Nokia. Just had a question about correlation of subscriptions. Correlation of multiple subscriptions. So my understanding is I don't see anything anywhere in the model where you could correlate multiple subscriptions. I think correlation might be important in situations where you don't want to overload your server, for example, because let's say, for example, you have the same path subscribed many times. So you want to correlate, you want to make sure that you don't overdo it. And the other thing is also for load balancing. Let's say, for example, you're collecting like a huge path or filter, however you call it, and then it's too much. The server cannot keep up with it. So you could chunk it and correlate together And then whatever on the collector side, you could kind of do something to some massaging, I mean, to put the pieces together. So that's number one.
Okay. Eric is dying to respond to that.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. If 5277 biz, that is not there. However, in Yang push it is. The reason really had to do with how complex do you want each draft to be. In the Yang push, there is subscription priority, which matches pretty much identically to what is done with HTTP2, which allows you to link in dependent subscriptions and percentage of subscriptions in order to allow resource contention issues to be held. That was not done with 5277 and 5277 biz for complexity reasons, and people thought the number of events coming down would not have the processing implications or the loading implications that would have been there for the Yang push. It's absolutely part of Yang push.
And one other comment actually is as well, we were talking about correlating subscription, but it also pertains basically both to correlating events. Per se. And so one of the items about that are basically that we're discussing actually for that reason is to have a clear identifier basically for an event message, and the identifier being unique regardless through which subscription you receive them, which will allow you to, for instance, identify ones which are duplicated across multiple subscriptions.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Second question I have quickly, you mentioned something about suspending subscriptions if you're overloaded or something like that. This is good in itself, but I could also suspend subscriptions for other reasons, you know, like if you have start and stop time. So if I have too many suspended subscriptions, that's not enough for me to tell if there was a problem processing these subscriptions or some sort of like resourcing issue or stuff like that. So is there a mechanism to report back to the collector side? Let's say, for example, I cannot keep up with whatever subscriptions you're sending me. Here you go, here's an alarm, here's an error message, whatsoever.
So basically, so one thing to be clear on the subscription, on the suspension of subscriptions, that is something that is owned by the server. So it's not the subscriber, it's the publisher, it's the server that basically issues so basically if the receiver basically wants to throttle or do those things, then it's up to the receiver essentially to change, modify the subscription parameters in such a way to make the stream of events that comes basically is manageable to him.
But the subscription could be suspended if you have a future start time, right? That means it's not active.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean there's a problem with resourcing. So is there a failure or error mechanism to report back from the server to the collector side?
So there are two aspects. One thing, basically, clearly, basically, as you establish the subscription, you can in the case of the dynamic subscriptions, you can basically indicate an error response that you don't accept the subscription, and basically the reason being as part of this parameters that are being returned basically the start time. So you could basically indicate you can indicate things that way if you don't want to accept that. The other case basically for the fact that you, for instance, might enter a subscription with a start time in the future, that is actually one thing that we are trying to address with these signaling messages, because one of the messages actually indicates that the subscription is actually starting. And basically that the sender is basically beginning to send events, and actually that is actually one reason precisely for that, because just when you might be successful in configuring or basically creating a subscription, but the stream of events does not start until the actual start time, and this is basically what you want to indicate separately, that basically from a certain point on, basically now you're basically reporting the onset of event occurrences.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So, couple of procedural comments. If you have a badge, please wear it. Especially important for people who are making notes to be able to see a name. The second is, nobody knows your name better than you, but almost no one else does know your name if you mumble it. So be clear in.
Okay, so moving on to the next draft. So the next draft is Yang push. That actually is not a new draft, but we've had one new revision since IETF 95. So the revision update was essentially to pull out the basic subscription model. So basically the things that you see in the RFC 5277 biz are no longer addressed in Yang push. So we had duplication of that before, so that has been essentially cleaned up. Instead, basically Yang push now builds on top of that, which basically means that the model was changed to augment the module defined in RFC 5277 biz rather than being a self-contained as it was before. And accordingly, because of this, obviously there need to be associated editorial updates throughout to basically adjust the text to actually fit the adjustments that we have in the model. So in terms of the model overview, basically the model itself hasn't really changed. It's the same parameters, but what you Bert, what are you doing? But basically what you see here is the change structure of the model, where basically now basically the model consists essentially of augmentations, and the augmentations are indicated in blue here on the diagram, basically in the IETF event notification module, basically where those things augment into. So basically for the subscription configuration, the things that are specific to Yang push, like the update triggers, for instance, that define when to push, under what circumstances, periodic, on change and so forth. Those items, those policies are, basically are put under this configuration there. Likewise, basically there are, for instance, additional update filters that can be applied beyond the event filters that we defined that are inherited from RFC 5277. Then likewise for the subscription state, the same thing. Basically, again, augmentations now into the IETF event notification model. And likewise, actually similarly, augmentations apply to the RPCs that you have for the input-output parameters. Basically, again, same things. The base RPCs are now defined in the RFC 5277 biz, and basically this model augments into that. And so basically the next steps now here are that we just update the specs essentially as we close on the discussion items. Again, we have a set of items that we are working our way through, which are listed here. One of the items that I was mentioning earlier concerned the actual push update, the actual event streams. So obviously, well, there's a push update stream, but just among the discussion to mention here also that we're having as well as, for instance, should we have a separate stream for operational data, and therefore to distinguish between statistics and other state information. So those are the types of discussions that we're working through. And with this, I'll turn it back to Eric.
Can we go back to the slide where you had the questions with EN1 to EN, I don't know, 12 or something? 9. I asked already a question concerning EN4, but one of them here is kind of important to decide now to be able to shape the document accordingly. The EN5 along with Netconf notif, should this draft obsolete 5277 or go in parallel? So I don't see any reason why we should have two RFCs which are valid and go in parallel. I was thinking that the BIS draft will replace fully 5277. If there is any comment, please tell us your opinion. So do the authors agree with my proposal?
I have no problem with it. Nobody else has agreed. We haven't necessarily closed all the issues.
Does the AD agree with my proposal? Can we have a note of this, that the BIS draft will replace 5277? If there is no comment or objection, my proposal counts.
Thank you for helping close an issue. Very appreciated. All right, probably the newest draft, the draft with the least new material, is the Notif Netconf draft. Basically, this pulls the messaging for how to do subscriptions over Netconf into its own separate draft to allow it to support 5277 biz and Yang push. It really does things like support multiple subscriptions over a single session, support a revised definition of the Netconf stream so that we can ensure backwards compatibility. You can get to the old streams, and we have a way of addressing new streams for events that might come in. And it's really ensuring that you support capabilities discovery and other things in a way which allow backwards compatibility with 5277. The draft itself is mostly sets of examples of how to do the transport encodings. There's not too much that's surprising if you've been reading the drafts up till now. There are some issues that we're still working. How do you do support of the messaging that's needed? The original 5277 used something called create subscription. It didn't have everything we needed. We're going to use established subscription as a different RPC for new capabilities for the new sets of event notifications that will go beyond 5277. So you can't do multiple create subscriptions on a single session. Therefore, we have to use established subscriptions. Stuff like that is pretty much closed, but we're leaving it up there as issues that we're working. We need to make sure that we support call home, and I think that's not going to be a hard thing. Basically, these are issues that we're just going to work through and nail down. I don't see anything majorly controversial in this particular spec. Again, it's pretty much following what was there before.
So question there would be, would the new RPCs be replacing, or are you still keeping the old ones?
Keeping the old ones because you have to have backwards compatibility. All right, the last draft is Notif RESTconf, and in Notif RESTconf, again, this draft has existed for a couple IETFs now. A lot of it was pulled back into the event notifications draft as well as the Yang push draft. The real thing that are the highlights of these drafts and something that you should keep in mind is that we have dynamic subscriptions over RESTconf. But if you're talking about configured subscriptions, there's very little reason for RESTconf. We're talking about doing that over HTTP, HTTP2 directly. Why? Because server sent events don't need a whole set of transactional protocols around them, and therefore the direct transport seemed to get rid of a layer that wasn't doing things that were absolutely necessary. One other good thing that you get out of the support for HTTP is you can leverage QoS capabilities for HTTP2. We mentioned a little bit ago the prioritization and the dependencies. That is a very useful function that is being added there. One other item that's a fairly big one is we're considering proxy subscriptions as part of this. When you deal with Netconf, typically you're dealing with the same subscriber and receiver. There are ways of messing with that, but we're not really talking about that now. The idea of having proxy subscriptions is something that's in an appendix of this draft, and we're going to try to work through what's the difference between a proxy subscription and doing it via an OAM interface. The big difference is a lot of the logic which might protect subscriptions, the negotiation, the capability exchange. A lot of these things might be useful to have in a proxy subscription, which would not be exposed necessarily in a traditional operations interface. And those are some of the issues that we have to work through. Last thing here, last slide we have before we get on to the open discussion is next steps. We have to figure out what kind of capability discovery and how does that work with existing RESTconf. And talking with Andy and others, we believe that we can use the existing RESTconf notifications and augment them in order to allow this to build on top. That has to be validated, but that's something that we're trying to work through. Let's see what else. One other thing, if you've read the draft closely, although the current draft does not use SSE, we want to move to SSE. The only reason the draft hasn't moved to SSE yet was there's one or two message types that we have to validate can fall in. An example would be 408. And the 408 would be, connection loss or something like that. We want to adopt it and make it completely equivalent to SSE, but we just have to nail it down that it can be done.
Okay. Andy Bierman, I'm a bit confused by this draft. You started out saying that we don't need to use RESTconf, or just go right on top of HTTP. So why don't you just call it Notif-HTTP and leave RESTconf SSE alone? That'll be part of RESTconf. This would be something else.
That's a good question. It's possible to separate them. The question of do we want to have configured subscriptions in one place and actually say we don't do configured subscriptions on RESTconf. We could separate into two drafts. I'm hoping that the same exact mechanisms for the SSE are used in HTTP and in the RESTconf. Therefore,
But that wouldn't be very restful, would it?
the events, the
Configuring notification parameters isn't how it works in RESTconf. You do a get with your parameters. The get is never ends. With the SSE design.
You still need a push in response, even for stuff that's just being delivered.
Okay.
All right, so these are the four drafts. I guess leave it open for other discussions. Hopefully these answer the questions. We have had discussions internally of the team. The team has said they believe they're worthy of adoption. So open questions.
Before we ask the important question, can you go back to the questions with EN 1 to 9? There is one of them which I think is important, even if we cannot decide it today. It should be brought to the mail list immediately to have a opinion poll on this. Should we have a mandatory transport? If yes, how? If yes, which one? We need to have a discussion on this. Is there an immediate opinion? Please come to the microphone.
Michael Abrams. So mandatory transport, you mean in this case it would be RESTconf or Netconf, or what do you mean by transport in this case?
So the question is to Eric.
Yes, that would be the question.
Okay, so
the question is RESTconf or Netconf, whether one of them is mandatory transport or none.
I would say regardless of which one you choose, you're gonna exclude a bunch of devices that will only support one of them.
And this is why we have it open.
Yes, so I think it should remain open.
Yes.
Kent Watson. So I think that would be for configured subscriptions only, right? Because for dynamic subscriptions, obviously, if you're dynamically configuring or asking for it on RESTconf, it'd be RESTconf transport, and if you're doing it on Netconf, it'd be a Netconf transport. So
Yes.
only for configured subscriptions, your question is. And I don't have an opinion as to whether or not there should be a mandatory.
Balázs Lengyel Ericsson, I don't really understand why only for. So I can imagine at least a device which says that, okay, I support Netconf generally, but for these big amounts of data that I have young push, I only support HTTP. So I think it is relevant even for dynamic subscriptions. Also, I think that there are some people who like RESTconf, some people who didn't implement it yet. I think the current paradigm that Netconf is enough to get all this functionality should be kept. So I would propose Netconf to be a mandatory transport for this.
So let us show it up here. Eric, can you start a mail thread on the mail list, giving the options and I mean naming them A, B, C, so that we can ask for consensus?
I will do that, and we'll also have the question on do we need it? The question of does it need to be there for dynamic is still open, and we will chat about that on the mailing list. I had not considered it to be mandatory for dynamic, and I want to find out more why. I'm sure there'll be reasons, but I want to find out more why.
Balázs Lengyel Ericsson. So is it the assumption that if you generally support Netconf for configuration, that means immediately that you support Yang push via Netconf? Is that the assumption? If yes, then state it.
You're saying if you have Netconf, then you should support Yang push?
If you have Netconf, edit config, get config, all the stuff, and you have Yang push as well, then you must support Yang push via Netconf.
I hadn't thought of it that way. But
it is indeed what I was expecting. Such discussion is necessary. Let's take it to the list. where Eric will start a thread giving the, or summarizing the possible options so that we can come to a conclusion. Okay?
Right. I'm
Thanks.
almost going to be beeped. I have 3 minutes, so I got 3 minutes to vote, I guess.
Yeah, we have the big question at the end of the session. I mean, the 4 drafts or the document structure for Yang push topic was already agreed in Buenos Aires. It was also agreed in Buenos Aires that we want to work on this. There was a clear consensus. So the adoption of the documents has been postponed because we didn't have substantial content, and some of the, or actually the 2 last drafts were not available. So they are available now. They have content which is sufficient as a starting point. So the adoption call now is actually pro forma because we agreed on this already in Buenos Aires to work on this topic area. So I will try to short up the question here with the statement. Is there any objection to adopt as working group item the 4 drafts presented here in the slot, which are, can you just state the correct names?
I can go to the slide names.
The draft names, which are subject to adopt now.
Right, that are shown on the screen.
IETF Netconf Yang push,
It's adopted.
Gonzalez Netconf 5277 bis, Gonzalez Netconf event notifications, void Netconf RESTconf notification. The Gonzalez Netconf event is actually, fitting to the other void Netconf RESTconf notif. So those 4 drafts are going to be adopted now if there is no objection. So they are now working group item drafts, if the AD also agrees, and will be then provided with the next revision you are going to provide. We will then accept those as draft IETF.
All right, thank you. And one last thing, remember we have an overview of this for anybody who wants to attend tomorrow. So please come if you want to deep dive or talk about any of the issues. Thanks.
So next is Kent.
Okay, good morning. Kent Watson, Juniper Networks. So this presentation is on these. It's over. Thank you very much. All right. So this presentation is on the server model drafts. If you recall, last time we decided to break up the server model draft into 5 drafts. These are the ones that are on the screen here. So they're presented in this order. So this is kind of bottoms up ordering. If you recall, the keychain draft defines the keychain. Then the SSH and TLS drafts import it, right? Providing groupings that are then used by the Netconf and RESTconf drafts. Exactly. And then there was the interim that led to the final decision to do that. The new drafts are labeled here. All the client drafts were new. So the server model draft had the server components, right? It had an SSH server, a TLS server, a Netconf server, and a RESTconf server, but it had none of the client drafts involved. So in creating the split, we also then created all the client modules. There is a pattern that's involved here. The SSH client is very, very similar to the TLS client module. So likewise, the SSH server and the Netconf client and the Netconf server. The key takeaway is that the solutions, issues, and resolutions in one almost always apply to the other. That's in that pattern. So as we're discussing these issues, just keep that in mind. And I won't go over the same issue twice. We'll just go over it once. Okay, so in the keychain draft, the primary update is that we added the user auth credentials section to it. This is to support SSH based clients, because when you're an SSH client, you're logging into an SSH server, you have to supply a username and maybe a password or an RSA key. So that's what this is for. But potentially this is usable for other protocols such as HTTP or SMTP. Whether or not it's actually useful in those contexts is something that we need to decide. Well, I can't really see that. Okay, so you can see that essentially the idea of this auth credentials section is that it's given the username and some either a client certificate or a public key or password. All these options are available. There's this priority that's intended so that if you actually have more than one, then the server can select which one it should use. One key thing that we need to talk about, and there's actually an issue that will be the upcoming slide, is that there's a clear text password and then there's a ciphertext password. So the idea is that the clear text password is configured, but then it's consumed by the server, which transforms it into a ciphertext password, and in the process deleting the clear text password. And we don't really have a Yang annotation yet to describe that behavior. So here are the open issues. We're going to go through these one by one. First is how to encode a certificate chain. And this issue is actually related to an issue that's in the zero-touch draft as well. The original idea is that it'd be easy on the clients if the chain were modeled as a leaf list of X509 certificates. So, okay, actually, first off, if everyone's not clear, sometimes when you supply certificates, it's also necessary to supply the list of intermediate certificates leading up to, but not necessarily always including the root trust anchor certificate. So again, the original idea was that this would be a leaf list. Yes, first question.
Anybody wanted to go back to your last slide is, you mentioned that we need a Yang extension or something for that mechanism. I think IANA crypt hash already does that.
Okay.
So you pass in your clear text password and you tell it how you, and it will get internalized as a hash and not exposed.
Okay, yeah, and this is actually issue number 5. So okay. Just whoever's taking the minutes, just note that for issue number 5. So again, there's a leaf list of X509 certificates. So I thought that would be simple for clients to configure, but actually it's kind of clunky. And so the options is, should we keep that, a leaf list, or should we instead use a PKCS12 object, which is an ASN.1 object, which would be dir encoded, so effectively it would be a binary in the Yang, or we could use a PEM file, so there'd be essentially like an ASCII text file with multiple begin-end statements in it, or 4, we could allow it to be a choice where it could be either could be supplied. One comment is between 2 and 3, OpenSSL can translate between the PKCS12 and the PEM file containing multiple certificate format relatively easily. And at the bottom of the screen is just an example of what we have currently. So option 1, you can actually see the leaf list, the certificate with a little asterisk next to it. That's the leaf list of X509 certificates. So the idea is to convert it into a single object like the PKCS12 you see on the right-hand side. Please, audience participation. These are open issues to the working group. We're trying to close them. Okay. So I guess we'll take that one to the list. The next is how to address the semi-configurable aspects of the keychain. We did actually discuss this last time, and it's been an ongoing discussion on the list as well. We haven't yet closed it, but to be honest, this is actually too complex to, I think, bring, to discuss here in this meeting. So we'll just take this one also to the list. Next, actually, question is, should we rename the keychain to a key store? We originally called it the IETF keychain. This was modeled after the Mac OS X keychain access utility. We renamed it to IETF system keychain because it had a conflict in naming with the routing area working groups IETF key-chain module. Regardless, I think keychain is still confusing. A number of people have approached me and said they're kind of confused between this draft and the routing area working group draft. And so I was thinking another common term for such a mechanism is key store. And perhaps we should rename this module to key store. We could just rename the module, or we could rename both the module and the draft.
Jürgen Schönwelder, my naive understanding is that you essentially care about public-private key pairs, while the other document cares about symmetric keys. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
If that's what is going on, then that should be somehow in the name.
Okay.
Because whether you call it key store or keychain or whatever, doesn't tell what the scope is of the model.
Okay, good point. Great, thanks. And I don't have a name at the top of my head that would address that, but that's a good point.
Asymmetric.
Symmetric keychain.
Symmetric or
Or asymmetric keychain. Okay. The next question is, does user auth credentials have the correct scope? So, should we actually limit it to SSH? Do we want to support, for example, HTTP clients or SMTP clients? I mean, the focus is to just support Netconf over SSH, in which case it's an SSH client. So we could just curtail it to that specific solution. And if we do, then should we rename it to something like SSH user auth credentials? Okay, so maybe time will tell on this one. I think as we get a little bit further with the implementations, we'll see whether or not it's in its current form applicable to other protocols and make the decision at that time.
Sorry, if it's just a grouping, as I understand, why do we want to restrict
So this
it?
one's actually not a grouping. This is the key chain model. So it's actually protocol accessible data nodes. All right. Number 5, and this is the one we touched on earlier regarding the clear text password being converted to ciphertext password, and Andy had a comment about the hashtag. Andy, can you just say some more about that? What do they do? How do they do that?
I should know, I implemented it, but it's, if you pass in the clear text version with some parameters, so it's got these weird parameters of how many turns and what the seed is and all that, then you basically generate a hash, you store that, and that's the only thing that's read back. The original clear text it magically disappears.
Was there any Yang annotation to
No, it's in IANA crypthash.yang. It's in its own Yang module.
Okay, so
just one type def, that's the whole module.
Well, what I worry about here is, I mean, the very last bullet point is that, if there is no Yang annotation to guide clients to this behavior, then they'll think, they'll forever think they're out of sync.
No, you just make the leaf of type IANA a crypthash.
Okay.
Well, actually, India, I think it's actually encoded in the string, something like clear text encoding separator clear text, or SHS marker, SH1 marker separator encoded.
Okay.
So can you go back 2 slides? I
Two
think,
slides.
No, maybe one more. That okay. I think the discussion was around the TPM, I guess, the model, and Martin had made a suggestion. Okay.
No, I'm sorry, it's number 2.
Yeah, it's number 2. So is it that the suggestion that he made was unclear at this point? Is that where we are, that we don't have a proposed solution?
We don't have a proposed solution currently. I did send an email to the mailing list about 10 days ago. And it started off saying, I don't actually understand your solution or how it can work. And so that was where we left it.
Yeah, I guess he's on the sailboat.
Yep. Okay, so that's it for the first draft. Moving on to the second. This is the SSH client server draft. The main update is actually a minor one, is we added a note that certain IP addresses have special meanings on some operating systems. The same note is also actually in the TLS client draft. I do wonder though, should this information instead go into RFC 6021, where the type is defined? It seems like it should be there. I guess we're not working on that particular draft at the moment, but just a note to everyone. But the other aspect of the update, and this is the major part, is that we added the SSH client half to this draft. And that was very much thanks to Gary Wu from Cisco. And the next slide will actually, we'll cover over the client part of it. So here's the client module. Again, it is a grouping. The intent is that it would be used by the Netconf and RESTconf modules. So there's two halves to it. There's the initiating SSH client grouping, and then at the bottom, the listening client SSH client grouping. So the initiating grouping is intended to be used by applications that are already handling the opening of the TCP connection, whereas the listening would then be for when you want to configure the client to, you're configuring the client to initiate the connections. I'm sorry, it's configuring the client to listen for call home connections. One thing interesting here is with this client auth part, there's a matches expression. So this is like an access control list, a firewall rule base. The idea is that you would step through it until you find a matching server. And then when you find the matching server, you then use the user credentials for that match to log into that server. Yeah. Okay, so that was just a review of that module. Not really asking for questions at this moment. Next draft, this is the TLS client server draft. Same update regarding the note on the IP addresses. And we actually ran out of time for creating the TLS client module. And so next draft, and this somehow got malformed of the formatting. First off, the name of this draft is a little bit of a head turner. You see Netconf showing up twice. It's actually correct. The first instance of the Netconf is the working group name, and the second instance is related, to the protocol, the Netconf protocol. So that's why it's named this way. The main update is that we added in new features, listen and call home. If you recall, well, it was actually I think Martin posted to the mailing list, but this draft was one of the very first users of the new Yang 1.1 if feature statement with the OR. And so we had if feature SSH listen or TLS listen. And Martin made the observation that by having it that way, you exclude the possibility for any future transports because you can't augment in another future transport feature statement into an if feature. So we actually had to break it out, and now we just have a simple listen feature and a call home feature. And we did actually add to this the Netconf client module, again, thanks to Gary Wu. There's one open issue, which is discussed in the slide after next. So here's the client module. Again, there's two parts. There's the initiate and the listen. The initiate is for configuring the device to initiate persistent or periodic Netconf connections, not Netconf call home. That's in the server model draft. And the listen part is for configuring the device to listen for Netconf call home connections, not on the normal port 830, but this would be the new IANA Netconf-CH SSH port. You can see how it is. This model is actually using the SSH client, in blue. It's using the initiating SSH client grouping. But missing again is the TLS client grouping completely. And again, the same for the listening section. So here's the open issue with the SSH listen feature. I think Balazs raised this issue privately to me. But the issue regards the SSH server module, not the client module. The question is, why is there an SSH listen feature at all in the server module? SSH is a mandatory protocol for Netconf, so why make it optional? So my thoughts are Netconf requiring the SSH transport is one thing. Whether the server listens or initiates call home connections is another. And call home is a newer functionality. It came after Netconf protocol was designed. So I'm thinking that some devices may only want to support calling home. And for example, maybe BBF, CPU type devices would only ever want to call home. So any comments about this?
Andy Berman, so this lists like what port you're listening on as well, right?
No, this is not the port that you're listening on. This is
Okay.
just whether or not it's required, like if you're configuring a Netconf server, is it possible that the Netconf server can only be configured to call home? Or is it mandatory that you always be able to configure the Netconf server to listen to a port? So a device may only want to call home. Maybe the device is not designed to ever have a listening port.
Oh, okay, yeah, I agree with that. I also noted that there don't seem to be very many implementations that pay attention to that support 830, port 830. Hardly any implementations seem to listen on 830.
Okay, so I'm going to take it that it's okay to leave the feature statement in as it is now and not make it a mandatory. The next and last draft is the RESTconf client server draft. Again, we broke out that if feature statement into independent features. And again, we ran out of time to implement the, it should say IETF RESTconf client module. And the next steps are add in the missing TLS and RESTconf client modules. Please reach out if you'd like to help. I mean, it's excellent that Gary has helped with so far, but actually more help would be very much appreciated. So if anyone would like to contribute to this work, please reach out. That'd be great. We need to close the open issues, of course. Again, during the hackathon, I was trying to update the reference implementation of call home, which I think is very important to validating this server model. The call home reference implementation uses this server model for configuring. And so I didn't actually complete that hackathon project yet. I ran into an issue with the libraries, and I'm working with the developers of those libraries to resolve that issue currently. And for sure, we'll be discussing this draft again at IETF 97. That's it for this presentation. Any closing comments before I move on?
Benoit Claes, so how many different Yang modules are depending on all the series of drafts?
So there's the syslog module that is depending on this, and I think that's the only one that I'm aware of.
Any in routing?
Yes, actually, I recall Chris Hopp's slide had something about the Netconf server in it, so there may be a dependency there as well.
That's something that maybe you want to check, because if you recall what I said in NetMod, that somehow we have to move faster and trying to identify what the bottlenecks are. I'm wondering if your series of drafts is not the bottleneck, so the top priority we should be focusing on in this working group.
Okay, so...
And I've got a tooling to help you to see all the dependencies. I just haven't done that.
Well, that's the beauty of having split these drafts into many, is that now we can prioritize them and focus on the ones that are dependencies to other drafts.
All right. So let's review those dependencies and get the priorities right.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so that's it for this presentation.
So,
Yeah.
sure,
Sorry.
why not?
Is it the same slide deck or different slide deck?
Zero touch, right? Or which one?
Yeah,
Yeah, zero touch.
Okay, hopefully this one's more interesting. At least I think it's more interesting. This is the zero touch draft presentation. Recap is that IETF 95, we reviewed a significantly updated draft, and it's 4 open issues. 2 of those issues need to be verified. 2 of those issues remain open, and 3 new issues were added. We're going to go over all 7 of those issues right now. But there's been very little discussion on list. I do post these issues to the mailing list, asking for a working group opinion, and not many responses come back. So one of the reasons this draft is taking a while to complete is because there's not much participation. So, so here are the updates. I don't actually want to go over them. right now, but you read the draft and you'll see them. Here are the open issues that we're going to discuss. The first issue regards the ownership voucher and whether or not we should formally define it. This is one of the issues that was open from before. So I guess the third bullet point down says there's been very little update to this issue. We started working on a standard format with the Anima team. So with the Anima team, we're trying to define a common ownership voucher format. And I mean, perhaps one issue is whether or not we use Yang to define the format. The issue is that when you use Yang, it's always intended to be configuration data, but here we actually don't want configuration. We just want an artifact, like a file. So, should we use Yang or something else like XSD or, a different structure? Okay, so this particular issue, the details of the voucher itself needs to be taken to the list, and so we'll take it up there. Okay, so how to commit config? Is it merged or replaced? The discussion so far has led us to this change. That is, a top-level flag, if you will, an enumeration that expresses to the device what it should do with its configuration. So the configuration itself is any data. It's intended to be, whatever native configuration the device supports. And, but the question is, what does the device do with it? Is it going to merge it? Is it going to replace completely? Or should it be something, more clever like a Yang patch? So the enumeration and currently we do have 4 enumerations. There's merge, replace, edit config, and Yang patch. The enumeration not only specifies how to process the configuration, but also it specifies the format of the configuration. So for instance, if it's merge or replace, then it's expected that the raw data would be, raw config. But if it's Yang patch, then of course it would be the Yang patch format. So the question is this a good idea to have this top level configuration handling enumeration? And if so, should we, keep all 4 enumerations or maybe remove the edit config since it's only good for XML and not any data compatible?
Andy, there's a higher level issue here, which is that many implementations treat some of these parameters as bootstrap, configure, coming from the config file, coming from the CLI parameters. So saying that you can change some of these parameters at runtime is a big, huge change to these implementations. So I think it's going to block implementation where a lot of people, they decide, holy cow, I'm going to have to. So this thing that I assume is static at boot time can be changed on me at any moment. That's a big architectural change and a lot of work inside the agent. So the whole issue of is it merge or replace is the higher issue is are you allowed to change this or does it take effect at the next reboot? You've seen those qualifications in Windows and other things in operating systems. Some parameters don't take effect until you reboot.
So I'm not sure if that it applies here. So again, what's happening is the device is booting up for the very first time. Again, zero touch, right? So the very first time it's coming up with its factory default configuration, and it's reached out to a Bootstrap server. It's pulling down a configuration, which is supposed to become its initial configuration. And so that configuration is coming down. It's any data. And the only question is, how does the device handle that any data? Is it going to merge it or replace, into its factory default configuration? It's nothing to do with it, storing it until it reboots again. It's going to commit it immediately.
Phil Schaefer, Juniper Networks. Is there really any implementation where this isn't just a straightforward bulk replace? I mean, there's really nothing fancy that happens here. You're given a configuration file. You take it as your marching orders and you carry on. I think you're inventing functionality here that nobody carries.
So initially, as it's actually implemented currently, we do bulk replace. but the feedback from customer was that it was overly complex because the default configuration was unwieldily large, and they really just wanted to have the diff. So then they asked for a merge capability, but then the merge can't remove nodes, and so that's when we get into, well, maybe we should have a patch. So we did start with that, and it's kind of grown into needing to have something more complex. Not trying to invent functionality.
Andy Berman, I agree with Phil. In our implementation, load config is a separate thing, and there's a lot of implementation details, such as at what code points the server instrumentation adds its server added nodes, you know, and so yeah, we implement it the way Phil's saying. You get the whole thing is just thrown in there. Then the instrumentation will see what's there and have the opportunity to change it. But I think just treat it as a copy config.
Right. So again, the same response to Phil. We did start with it being just like a copy config, a full replace, and that was considered to be too complex.
It's not that complex. It just makes the file a little bigger or something. But having lots of options to do this seems to me what's complex.
Eric Voigt, I like the way it's done here because I know that it can be possible to get Bootstrap config from several places where you might merge it from several places, security information and potentially ACL information. Do you see any issues with Bootstrap getting from several places, which is another reason why you wouldn't merge and replace?
No, this is not an issue of coming from several places. The device has reached out to a specific Bootstrap server and it's pulling down a specific configuration from that one and only Bootstrap server. So it's not a case of it having to deal with multiple, merging the configuration from multiple Bootstrap servers. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Just one more comment. So Rob Wilson, Cisco. If you do end up supporting multiple options, does it make sense to make, for example, replace the mandatory one that all implementations have to support and the other one's optional in some way, reducing the load?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's good. We can do that as well. Okay. Next issue, the signature over Yang data. We did actually discuss this one at 95 as well. The current text says that the signature is over the data in whatever form it's provided, whether it be XML or JSON. But this doesn't work well for Bootstrap servers, which again are presenting a RESTconf API. In part, for instance, because the device could ask for the format, either an XML or JSON. It's the device's choice. And so then what exactly is the signature over, right? So if the signature was over the XML, but the device asked for JSON, then it won't match, for instance. So the question is, can we assume the Bootstrap server has the owner certificate private key and therefore can dynamically sign whatever encoding it hands out? So again, you have a Bootstrap server, it's bringing the configuration down to the device, it's been signed. But when did it get signed? Did it get signed dynamically, like at the time the device asked for it, or was it configured, from some northbound API that's out of scope to this effort, and therefore, it's like pre-configured signature. There actually is some. I think it would be a good implementation if the Bootstrap server had access to the private key that it could do it dynamically, but making that assumption would probably not be a very popular. So, it's, I think, the best solution, but I don't think people would like the idea of us mandating or making the assumption that Bootstrap servers have access to the private key. So that's, I think, the negative to number one. Second option is, should we define Bootstrap info and redirect info using some other syntax? So, for instance, ASN.1. and present it as a binary blob. So just get out of trying to use Yang and the possibility that this configuration could be formatted in different, either JSON or XML. Just make it a blob. So you're signing the blob, and obviously the blob isn't going to change whether or not the client is asking for JSON or XML. A third option is, should we define an encoding independent signature algorithm? So for instance, for each node in a depth first traversal convert the value to a string and append it to a buffer and then sign that buffer, right? So regardless if they asked for the JSON or the XML, they could do that traversal, calculate the same buffer, and verify the signature over that buffer. Any comments, preferences?
Looks good.
Okay, take it to the list. Next issue, removable storage details. The current text says details such as the format of the file system and the naming of the files are left to the device's manufacturer to define. To be clear, that this text is referring to the removable storage device itself, such as the USB flash drive, not to the device. So it's not the device's file system, it's the USB drive's file system. Jürgen had a comment, and so we added, however, in order to facilitate interoperability, it is recommended devices support open standards-based file systems and to have file naming convention that is not likely to have collisions with files from other vendors. Any opinions on this text before we close this issue? Okay, so no opinions. I'm going to assume that we can close this issue with this text. Next issue, enhanced script support. The current draft allows for a single script. However, ongoing implementation discussions suggest that there really should be both a pre-commit and a post-commit script. For instance, the pre-commit script could be used to download VNF images used by the configuration, and the post-commit script could do any necessary cleanup, maybe just deleting the VNF images, for instance. So the suggested update in green, we're adding pre-configuration script, and in orange, renaming it from being just script to post-configuration script. That's the update in the current draft. And if there's no objections to it, we'll close this issue with that update. Okay. Next is how to encode a chain of certificates. We talked about this earlier, but let me go through it. The draft currently states that the owner certificate is just a single certificate, but the owner certificate actually needs to be presented along with a chain of intermediate certificates leading up to the trust anchor. So again, the same options. We could use the ordered by leaf list that we saw before. Use a PEM file or a PKCS12, or let it be a choice. Before, when I asked the question, no one had an opinion, so I assume the same is going to be true for this draft. I actually don't myself have a preference yet, so I can't make a recommendation. We'll just go with that one. I guess I'll continue working on the implementation, and when it's obvious that one solution is the best, I'll make that announcement, and hopefully everyone will agree with it. Next issue, how to verify the boot image integrity. The current draft hard codes the use of both MD5 and SHA-1 hash algorithms for the purpose of enabling a device to verify the downloaded boot image in case it doesn't have an embedded signature. But a recommendation came to try to use a digest format that is more generic and less obsolete. So both MD5 and SHA-1 are obsolete, or not highly regarded hashing algorithms. So some options are to do nothing, just keep the MD5 and SHA-1 as we have it today. Another would be to replace both of those with SHA-256, which is still a hard-coded option, but at least it's current and considered to be good. Another option would be to use a format that encodes both the algorithm's name as well as the hashed value, while still, because we don't want to support every hashing algorithm in the world, we make one mandatory. So we'd, for instance, make SHA-256 the mandatory, and we just have this format for flexibility in the future. On that third option, I have to say that no such format exists. I've gone to the security area director and discussed it, and we've reached out to several security experts. So amazingly, no such thing exists, but we thought we could write a draft and present it to the security area working group so we could define that format, and then we could use it here if we wanted to. So any opinions or preferences with these three options?
So, yeah, go ahead.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I think I have a preference to not do nothing. So I think we shouldn't be trying to bake in things that are obsolete. I also wonder whether it makes sense to try and keep it open in future. So even if you had one that's mandatory now, it's possible that there's some security flaws with that, and then you don't want that. So I think you want to allow it to basically change over time.
Right. So that's saying option number 3, or the third bullet point is, and I agree. I think that would be best.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I mean, again, we would have to define that format as a draft and another working group and get it through, which sounds like it'd be a dependency and take a long time to flesh out. The good news is that draft would be a very simple draft, and my co-author would be Sean Turner, who's the, was the previous 8B of that working group, and it would get through very quickly. So
if you can go fast, that's the best choice.
Okay, so final stretch. The draft is nearly done. Operational experience shows this to be true. Again, Jennifer has had an implementation of something similar to this for a while now. We only need to address these open issues, the ones that we just discussed, and then we can close this draft and then call for last call.
The issues are all on GitHub, right?
They are.
So just to check here again, we are, having the issues on GitHub. We are repeatedly stating what is the proposed solution and asking for comments. All issues from GitHub are asked on the mail list to validate. If nobody speaks up, we cannot wait on comments. We are going to proceed and realize the proposed solution. So if there is any comment on the issues presented here or on the issues on GitHub, please speak up on the mail list.
Okay, thank you.
Let's start with Rob, then we'll come to him. So we have the part here now on the discussion on Yang or Netconf data stores. Actually, I don't know the term Yang data store. I don't know where it comes from. We actually have Netconf data stores defined in Netconf standard RFC. So Rob Wilton is on the agenda, but I actually would like to hear also Jürgen with his proposal. So I think we have sufficient time. Let's go through your presentation and we will have a discussion involving Jürgen.
Okay, so Rob Wilton. I've already presented both of these drafts in NetMod, and so I'm going to give a sort of summary of them here and then trying to bring the issues that are applicable to Netconf in particular and RESTconf here. So there's two solutions that are being proposed here. They're both sort of conceptual, abstract solutions, data store solutions being proposed by Jürgen and myself. I've also defined one way you can implement part of that by using Yang metadata to represent what I've defined in my solution of this concept of an abstract data store. And the idea of an abstract data store is one that you could expose as a regular data store and read it and potentially write to it directly. But the idea that I have is you don't need to do that. And instead, via use of metadata, you can get the same information out in a more efficient way. So the crux of the idea of using this metadata is so that clients have to only interact with, say, 2 data stores rather than maybe 3. So a quick recap of the data store model that I've put forward. A complicated looking diagram, but it's not actually as complicated as it looks. At the top, we've got a candidate and startup configuration data stores. Nothing's happening with those. They're not really changing in any way. Then I have a persistent configuration data store. That's sort of what's running config today. I've tried to give it a better name as such, one that is more accurate to what it's doing, because it's not implying what the device is actually running. It's just implying what the operator intends the device to be doing. And it's been called persistent because that's the configuration data store that when you write to it, you would expect it to be saved to the startup configuration and restored if the device rebooted. I've also marked an ephemeral configuration data store to handle the I2RS requirements. And the expectation there is that that's an optional data store. So if you support I2RS, then you would use that one, otherwise it would disappear. Phil.
Phil Schaefer, Juniper Networks. Isn't persistence a poor name for it, considering that you have the option to have the distinct? Isn't persistent a poor name for it, considering that you have distinct startup, which allows you to have an explicit persistent configuration? Running is in the distinct startup scenario is not persistent.
Persistable maybe, or will be maybe. I mean, the exact name of it can be refined. I don't mind that, but I think that calling it running configuration is very confusing. Okay. And the reason for that,
and I would say the same about consistent.
Okay, it's fine. So taking together the persistent configuration and ephemeral configuration data source as two entities, you can abstractly consider those when you do any resolution priority between the two into one intended configuration data store. And this is meaning effectively take the total configuration that the operator desiring that the device has and what sort of state it should be in. It's possible that you could have other sorts of configuration data stores added in here to do things like enabling, disabling configuration that was talked about elsewhere. From that, intended configuration abstract data store, it's not one I expect you to access directly. You then effectively write this configuration when it's applied into the operational state data store. And here, what I'm trying to make clear is that the operational state data store contains an exact copy of the applied configuration if the applied configuration has been fully successfully applied. So not if it's maybe not been applied because there's a line card missing or the system has decided to deviate its value or the configuration has failed. But if everything's succeeded, what I'm saying is that you'd expect to see in the applied configuration part of the operational state data store is the exact copy of that intended configuration. Then also in the operational state data store, we have some other nodes to fix some other problems. We have all our config false nodes. That's the same things that we have today, the operational state that we have today. Nothing is changing there. And we also have these system created config nodes. And as discussed before, when it's presented before, the idea of this is to allow you to merge feature and feature state branches together. It allows you to create those nodes to hang off operational state nodes if you need to. Finally, just to say that the idea here is that, and I'll cover this in the slides coming up, that my idea is that a netconf get request, for example, would be changed to be just returning the state from the operational state data store. So that's what I'm proposing as a change to netconf. The observation here is that if intended configuration and applied are the same, so you have devices where you don't have that split, and if you don't have any of these system-created interfaces, the same data is being returned. Yes.
I'm Andy Bierman. A couple points. One, operation names like an RPC name are really cheap, so I would suggest we don't need to reuse the letters GET to add new functionality. You can come up with a different combination of letters. And the other is that we keep hearing how critically important it is to know the difference between applied and intended, and there are the protocol interaction model is critical. There are many different possible protocol interaction models, and you kind of throw that off to the side. I'd be really interested in knowing and seeing the documentation of the proprietary solutions for this critical problem. Obviously, there must be many because it's so important that it needs to be solved in your proprietary space. So what are the proprietary protocol interaction models that have been tried, and what are the pros and cons of those interaction models?
Okay, so I think in terms of the proprietary approach, the open config models illustrate that quite clearly. So that's the proprietary approach they're taking. They've got a separate leaf for the intended value and a separate leaf for the applied value, and you can manage and read those individually. So that's the way that's approached.
Walid Book from Nokia. So I have a couple of questions here. The first one, it's probably not related to the new data stores on its own, but just generally, if I'm trying to bridge the gap in my mind between the different data stores and between Yang. So let's assume this is a question generally to the Netconf experts here. Let's assume you could have multiple Yang sets on the same box. Do all these sets need to apply to all the data stores, or could you mix and match? Could you say, for example, I have such and such Yang set working on such data store, and another Yang set applies to a different data store? So this is question number one. Question number two, I see here some interactions between the new data stores and some of the existing Netconf requests that do exist, but I don't see any mention, for example, for stuff like lock and unlock. How would that affect lock and unlock, for example? Whether, I mean, the relationship between the different data stores, and how would you do that globally, right?
So can you go back to your first question? You say Yang sets from different places. Can you just reiterate your question there?
I might be wrong in my assumption, but you know, by assumption, I think there should be one Yang set on every box, right?
But what do you mean by Yang set?
Yang modules, like
Okay.
you know, vendor specific, you know, or proprietary Yang models, or open config, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, my assumption is, and I might be wrong, it would apply to all the data stores. But
yes,
how
I think
about
so.
if you have multiple Yang sets on the same box? Could you have it? Because I haven't seen any mention of that in the RFCs. And this actually brings that question again to my mind. So could you have scenarios or combinations of such and such Yang set or Yang modules applies to that data store, but it doesn't apply to that data store? And if such and such thing exists, how would you deal with it in here?
So the answer is I don't know. I think that actually that, let's go on, Kate.
I was just going to partially answer that. Sue's not here right now, but the I2S working group has they have a requirement that some Yang modules can be annotated that they can only apply to the ephemeral data store. So there's that one instance of what you're saying.
But that still would be in the same set, I think. I mean, if you have a complete separate set, like the open config models versus the IETF models, then I don't think that these drafts address that. I think that becomes an implementation specific choice.
Let's not talk about
To the mic, please.
Let's not assume it's open config or ODL versus, for example, proprietary. Let's assume two different Yang sets of proprietary data models.
So I think my understanding is that that's an implementation specific detail, that how you merge those two together, and that the drafts only assume there's one.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Hi, Eric Voigt. I think we talked about this a little last time, but I want to kind of raise it up again because I think it's a pretty important point. The persistent configuration, I agree, you know, there's going to be one, but in terms of system created configuration, such as what happens after you get an 8021X and then you start to download configuration, is going to have the same problems as attended and applied configuration. So if we start to separate the data stores, you have to go to multiple data stores to find out what the ACLs are for a particular port, we're running into issues. So I'd love to have the total solution address the applied and intended that might include issues that are downloaded from system state to show the full configuration.
Okay. Can I discuss it with you offline to understand more detail, please?
Michael Abrahamson. So just so I understand this, the iOS XR, for instance, has the like interface pre-configure. So like the line card is not there, but I'm still applying configuration for something that is not there. That would be in the persistent configuration.
Yes.
And as soon as I put in the line card, it's going to end up in applied.
Yes.
And what's ephemeral here?
Ephemeral is I2RS. So the configuration that's coming through the I2RS agent will go into ephemeral.
Okay. So that's the one that was coming not in the persistent configuration. It's coming from somewhere else.
From the I2RS agent, yes.
Okay. So, but the whole concept of configuring something that is actually not in the box and it's not in persistent configuration, which will not have an interface with operational state, that's still fine, right?
Yes. So say that your question again.
Okay. I'm going to add persistent configuration for something that is physically not in the box.
Okay.
And it's not going to have an operational state and so on. That's still fine, right?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think there's an open question as to how you act on that. So that when you put the request in, do you say that you reject it if it's not there, or do you have some special status code or option when you put a request in to say allow pre-configuration to occur and don't error on it or something like that?
Yes, because I mean the whole fact of having, like iOS XR would not allow you to do interface configuration. It'll say, I'll allow you to do in pre-configuration.
Yeah.
And then you're bypassing a lot of the, stuff that where it checks if this actually will work or not.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing Yang validation and all of that stuff, and I just wanted to understand that the Yang modeling language, I mean, you need to disable a lot of the checks because it's actually, the box doesn't know the details because it doesn't exist actually in the box at this time.
So semantically, the checks should be, is the configuration semantically valid? As in, could it be valid if the right line was put in?
Yes,
I think.
okay. Yeah.
Okay. So a recap of the metadata draft that that I've put up. So effectively, the idea is to have some Yang extension model that defines some metadata, a config status leaf that represents the state of config nodes as to whether they're intended or applied, and a config status reason leaf that indicates failure cases. So either the config has particularly failed, or if it can't be applied for some reason, i.e. covering that sort of pre-configuration case. And then I've got different choices as to what annotations you return. Selectively annotate is the one I imagine you would mostly likely use, and that says annotate any of the nodes that have not converged. So any configuration nodes where the intended and applied differs for some reason, those are the ones I would expect you to annotate. There's also a couple ones like annotate all to make it easier if somebody wants to write a client that gets all the metadata annotations for all config nodes, and an annotated diff that effectively says just return the configuration from the box that hasn't converged. So I'm not going to go through the details of what the actual particular options were in this one because I've done it in NetMod, but I'm going to cover what I think the additions or impact is to Netconf and what I'm proposing here. So I'm proposing two new data stores, persistent configuration, which is very similar to running configuration, not quite the same, and the operational state data store. So that's really what I'm proposing it gets added here. The three optional data stores, ephemeral configuration is optional in terms of if you support I2RS, then you'd support that data store. And then there's these two abstract data stores, intended and applied. You might want to support those. You might want to allow clients to read those and read the contents of them, but I'm saying you don't have to. So it'd be down to a client implementation to decide whether or not they want to support those. Then in terms of making the solution work, I would suggest you would add support for the up-to-date metadata, and you would do that for the persistent configuration data store, the ephemeral, and the operational state data store. So you could make a request, a GET request to say, I want the contents of this, and I want to have these annotations. And then finally, I'd also support, yes, go on.
Just for clarification.
Of course.
Sergio Bellotti from Nokia. In the picture, it seems that the intended configuration, that intended configuration, exactly, this one, is the sum of persistence configuration plus ephemeral if
Yes.
there is I2RS.
Yes.
When you mean that the second slide, the other part of the slide seems that you mean that the intended configuration that can be added,
yeah,
but only for the read part and not for the write part. This is what you mean in the other slide?
I don't understand your question. This slide here?
No, the other one.
This one?
So there is persistence configuration that it seems that is belonged also to the intended configuration.
Yes, it
in
does.
The picture.
Yes. So
why is it optional?
Why is intended optional?
Yeah, because intended is something that is over system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reason it's optional is because I don't think as a client you need to know the information, because you as a client you should know effectively what information you're pushing down to the device. So you already, I think, you know that, and so you might want to allow clients to query it back. But you can sort of, using the Yang metadata annotations, get that information back anyway. So I've not listed the specific annotations, but one of the annotations would be this value is applied or this value has been overwritten by another data store. So you can infer that information without having to track another data store. It's trying to minimize the number of data stores a server's got to return data for and a client might have to manage.
Okay, so the operational state data store is something that is the picture is
That's read only. That's the current,
Yes,
all
is
the current
the total
applied
blue one.
Yeah, yes. Has all the applied configuration, which is both the applied persistent and applied ephemeral, and all the operational states.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andy Bierman, the solution and everything seems very reasonable, especially the optional nature. This requires to know intended versus applied needs an API in the system to actually query down, and it's been brought up before. How far does that go? Because this is very implementation specific. I could have many layers of daemons.
Yes.
So
yes.
does it mean that my top layer is just passed it off to the next guy? Or does it mean I've gone all the way down to the atoms in the silicon and say, yes, this is now the way it is. So that's never been clear at all what applied means.
Okay.
And, is it important that different systems don't agree on what applied means? Because different systems might say, I've handed this off to the routing daemon and I'm done. It's applied.
So
is that
I think,
okay?
Yes, I think the definition is as far as you possibly can. So ideally, it's down to the atoms in the forwarding ASIC. Is what they would like. That's what the open config folk would like it to be. But it all depends on the time delay. So if it's going to be a few milliseconds before it gets written, I don't think it matters. If it could fail or it's going to be a long time, then I think you should wait. And I think over time, systems would converge to the right answer.
We need to come to a conclusion. Ken, please go ahead. But we need to.
Actually, I had a separate question, so I want to close out that question.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, so I also, regarding the intended configuration, it's an optional data store. I'm a little bit confused, especially in your diagram. I thought intended was a synonym for running. And in your picture, you actually don't list running. So what is intended if it's not running?
So running, I see, as a split of both intended and applied. And that's because some devices, if you query the running data store today, some devices return the intended configuration, i.e. what it wants to be doing, and some devices return what the actual device is doing today. So I don't think it's well defined.
Okay.
So that's why I put the split in. And here, like the legacy support, maybe it's not clear, it's maybe more clear in the document. The idea is you support running and keep it as a fairly ill-specified definition. So without trying to change it.
In your diagram, I think you had it persisted data store or persistable.
Yes.
So that's the running, right?
So yeah, effectively that's what people think of running today. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Did you want me to stop?
Yeah. Yeah, this would be good. I would like to give the word to Jürgen just to explain the differences in his proposal. Could you come to the microphone? If you want, we can open one of your slides just to summarize your proposal.
Well, I don't really want to say much because, so what I'm looking for is having a solution on what the model is going to be, but I think we have a meeting for that this afternoon, so I don't think we
yeah, indeed, there will be an upstate discussion this afternoon in room chess, I assume. I assume this room will be too small for this kind of discussion, but anyway, we will try. Yeah.
So in the document that I wrote, I indicated some changes that might be made to Netconf, but it's very rough. So I think we need to first have the model settled before we can talk about the changes that we need at the protocol level. And the discussion here kind of confirmed that, right?
Yes. Yeah, this discussion needs to continue. I just would like to come to a point. Andy, just quick.
Can you put up the information again about that meeting? And yeah, we can work out details like moving forward. I agree that running config is ambiguous now, but moving forward, you can clarify that. So someone conforming to the, I'd prefer to keep the term running, but just clarify it.
Again, there will be an upstate discussion this afternoon in room chess starting at 2. Well, I would like to come to a point which was actually not really clear in NetMod session. NetMod co-chairs, Netconf co-chairs, and the AD need to have a discussion how to address this topic in the future. As a matter of fact, Netconf chairs believe whenever the data store concept defined in Netconf standard RFC is going to be changed in a dependent manner, also the operations get, etc., need to be changed. This requires a discussion in Netconf working group. And this also requires an update of Netconf standard. I wouldn't be agreeing with a solution published in NetMod working group just by skipping Netconf working group.
So Jürgen Schönwelder, historically, NetMod did Yang, and it also did the architecture document, and the Netconf working group did Netconf, and I think we should just not change anything.
So what does this mean? Are you proposing to address this topic in NetMod working group?
What I'm saying is that the architecture work should, like it was historically done, stay in NetMod, and any protocol work should stay in Netconf, right?
I don't know what you mean with architecture work in detail. Whenever it comes to change the data store concept in Netconf standard, we need to do it in Netconf working group because we are going to extend, modify Netconf standard.
Frankly, I don't care. It's the same people. We have to get it work together, and we have managed in the past, and I think we're making
this
an
is
artificial
true.
problem.
I also said in NetMod session, I appreciate the discussion in NetMod working group because it is addressing, together with other Yang modules, I2RS requirements. It is important to start this discussion in NetMod working group. But at some point, we need to see where we start the work in Netconf.
Benoit Claes. So actually the last sentence from Jürgen is about what I wanted to say, that I don't care because it's the same set of people. However, I want to be slightly more positive this time. And what I would like to propose is that you're going to meet this afternoon, right? You're going to have the NetMod key people, the Netconf key people. So why don't you guys agree? And this is fine. Now, if you can't agree, I'll take a decision, but
yeah, I think we can agree, but there is actually a very simple constraint. Netconf working group has been chartered to update Netconf standard, and I don't want to change that.
I mean, the two working groups are impacted anyway, right?
Ken Watson. So I think that the architecture document, the work can be done in the NetMod working group, but when it comes to the solution document, there's likely going to be impact to Yang, and there's going to be impact to Netconf RESTconf. The impact to Netconf RESTconf would be drafts that would be going through the Netconf working group.
This might be a solution.
Yes.
What he said.
Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys own Netconf. If we're making changes to Netconf, it's yours. But understanding sort of the conceptual model that is largely protocol independent seems like the right place to do that is NetMod.
Thanks. I just wanted that this is clear.
And for the record, Lou Berger, sorry.
So we are at the end of the session. Benoit, do you want to say anything?
Yes, different topic. Do I have 30 seconds? Yeah. Okay, good. So it's an observation. You know, this working group is called the Netconf working group, but we've been evolving. We have RESTconf now. What we see coming is that we're discussing HTTP2. What we see coming is that there are gRPC discussing config and telemetry. So the observation, and we saw it also with the naming convention, like it's draft IETF netconf-netconf or netconf-restconf. So my observation is that we're slowly moving into a working group which is any transport, any Yang data model driven management transport.
Actually, Netconf at the beginning was independent of the modeling language. So it was started with XML. And
so are you proposing a name change? Okay.
So who has the second blue sheet? Please bring to the chair's table. So this session is closed. Thank you very much. Did you sign?
No,
I just signed. Bert, did you sign? How much do we have? We have 41 here. No,
That's it?
31.
And then some here also.
Rename. Yeah, I don't know how people in the room will understand, people outside the room.
Some here? Me? Gee. Whoa, yeah.
Nobody speaking to chat? No. I'm gonna go change into short sleeve. And everybody, it's gonna be hot. I don't know. I'm definitely changing.
Yeah, I just would like to